In this video, I'll describe just what you need to complete this workshop. You'll need access to the internet in order to acquire the jQuery library. You'll need an editor to edit the jQuery code, and you'll need at least one, but preferably more browsers in which to test your code. So let's start with the jQuery library. In a subsequent exercise, I'll be explaining to you exactly where to locate this code library, how to download it to your system, and then use it in your code. As far as the text editor goes, any text editor of your choice is fine for the Mac or the PC. For this workshop, I'll be using Dreamweaver 5.5 as my text editor, but you're welcome to use anything from Notepad on up. You should have a browser in which to test your code. So I'll be using Chrome, Firefox, maybe some other browsers along the way. You should have at least one browser to test your code. I recommend Firefox or Chrome. But if you have access to Internet Explorer, Safari, those will all be fine as well. You'll also need the data files which have been supplied with this video workshop. So as we open new files, I'll reference exactly what file you need to open to follow along and what directory you'll find that file in. So if you've got your text editor, you've got at least one web browser, you're ready to begin. In this video, we're going to take a quick look at exactly what jQuery is. With the current proliferation of new languages in modern web development, the terminology can get somewhat confusing. So the short answer is that jQuery is a JavaScript code library. And a code library is simply a collection of code, objects, properties, and methods in a given language that can be called upon and configured by the developer for their particular circumstances. The jQuery library is open source and free to use. Basically what it does for you is it encapsulates common tasks in these fairly easy to use functions. The fundamentals of jQuery, which you'll learn shortly, will show you that jQuery provides a means to select elements in the web page and then act on those elements in the web page. So some of the things you can do with jQuery include manipulating an element's location on the page, manipulating the CSS styles that are used on that page, dynamically add and remove content from a web page, and jQuery also allows you to create event-driven behavior. You can do things like add effects and animations, things like slideshows. You can create cool interactive buttons and menus, all much easier than with standard JavaScript. The official definition from the jQuery website states that jQuery is a fast and concise JavaScript library that simplifies HTML document traversing, event handling, animating, and AJAX interactions for rapid web development. jQuery is designed to change the way that you write JavaScript. I think this is a very good definition of what jQuery is. So now that you've got an idea of what the language is, we'll start by learning how to use jQuery and reap the benefits of writing less code, writing code faster, and speeding up our development time. In this video, we're going to take a look at why you might choose to use jQuery in your web development. We'll also take a look at an HTML file that uses both standard JavaScript and jQuery, and we'll compare and contrast the two methods. The short answer to the question, why should I use jQuery, is that it will help you develop faster. And part of the reason for this is that you'll typically write less code using jQuery than you might write using standard JavaScript. Another reason that jQuery has been adopted so widely is that the author of the jQuery library has definitely benefited from the knowledge and the mistakes of the past, so that the code that you utilize in this code library really does improve upon the methods of the past. So it does give you a degree of confidence that you're using methods that are time-tested in terms of the maintenance of the code over the life of the project, and even the performance in the browser. Another benefit of jQuery is that it helps us produce unobtrusive JavaScript. And what we mean by this is simply JavaScript that can be put in a .js file and separated from the contents of the web page. If you've done any amount of web development in the past couple of years, you're probably aware of the tenet known as the separation of concerns. That states that the structure of the web page, the code that dictates what the page is composed of, for example, images, paragraphs, tables, lists, etc., should be a very short file with nothing more than basic MXML tags identifying what the page is composed of. Of course, this would not be a very good-looking page, so we create another file which dictates the look and feel of the web page, and that file is the cascading style sheet. Finally, the behavior of the website is located in yet another file, typically a JavaScript file, and that's very easy to do when you write jQuery. because when you write standard JavaScript, it's very easy and tempting to place that JS code inside the HTML structure. The same is true of manipulating the CSS with JavaScript, and you can actually do this inside the HTML, which defeats the purpose of that separation of concerns. It muddies up our code, and it results in what we used to call tag soup, which makes it very difficult to maintain the code because you're constantly sifting through a very large file in order to find what you need. With jQuery, you can put the code in a separate file, and even the way that you write jQuery simply doesn't lend itself to placing the code in the structured HTML file. So those are just some of the main reasons that you might consider using jQuery. Let's open up a file, JS versus jQuery, so that we can take a quick look at some basic functionality that has been written in both standard JavaScript and also in jQuery. Once that file is open, you can go ahead and run it in your web browser. I'll be opening this file in Chrome, and you can see that it's just a basic website with a standard radio button question asking you to rate the difficulty level of jQuery. And if I go ahead and make a selection, I can see the selection I made in this text input field by clicking the answer with JS button. And by the same token, I can change my answer and get the same result, but by activating a different button, the one that invokes jQuery instead. So both buttons give me the same functionality. Now let's take a look at the code. We'll open the file in any text editor. I'll be using Dreamweaver 5.5 as my text editor. One of the things we talked about earlier was unobtrusive JavaScript. So we scroll up to the script block on line 7. The first function called answer.js is the standard JavaScript code that includes a way of traversing through those radio button answers and locating which radio button was selected and ultimately placing that answer in the text input field. Now we could take this code and place it in a .js file, and that would help us achieve the separation of concerns and thus unobtrusive JavaScript. But the actual call to this function is inside of the HTML structure. Now remember, this portion of the page should just be about what these elements are. This is a paragraph, for example. This is a form, and this is a radio button. At the bottom of the page, you see two buttons. The second button is the one that the answer with jQuery has no evidence of JavaScript or jQuery code in it. But the one above it, the one that answers with standard JavaScript, has an on-click event handler, and that's what invokes the JavaScript. So lines 68 and 69 clearly show us the difference between obtrusive and unobtrusive JavaScript, or JavaScript that's just embedded within the web page. If we scroll back up to the two functions, you can see that there's far less code in that second function. And this is the code that gets the second button to work via jQuery versus standard JavaScript. Both buttons do the same thing, but rather than this somewhat lengthy code that uses the for loop, which iterates through each radio button to determine the checked radio button, we simply have this code here in jQuery. So we'll learn much more about this code in subsequent lessons. So this was just a brief look at why we might use jQuery and a quick comparison between standard JavaScript code and jQuery. In this video, we'll be learning how to acquire the jQuery library so that you can use it in your websites and web applications. You'll need to direct your attention to the Assets directory, inside of which is the subdirectory Chapter 3 Getting Started with jQuery. You'll find a HTML file in there called exercise_1_1. So go ahead and open that in your code editor. I've opened mine in Dreamweaver, and then we'll run it in the browser. So there's some basic instructions here as to how to acquire the jQuery library. If you look at step 3, this is where we're going to find the link to jQuery.com where the jQuery library is located. If you go ahead and click that link, it should take you to jQuery's website. On the right-hand side, you should find a Download jQuery link. Go ahead and click that link, and you'll see that it opens up the actual jQuery library. If you're accustomed to looking at JavaScript, it may look terribly complex at this point. A part of the reason for that is its human readability has been reduced somewhat by the removal of extra characters. In other words, any character that doesn't contribute to the functionality of the code is removed. Things like line breaks, space bars, multiple space bars, the tab key, and so forth. So these are characters, as developers, we typically add just to create the file that's a little bit easier to read. So we know that curly braces, for example, sit on a line by themselves. So all of this extra characters have been removed, and so what you're looking at is what's referred to as the minified version of a JavaScript. At this point, we could select all of the code with a Control-A and go ahead and copy that code. You could return to your code editor and then simply paste it into a new JavaScript file. So if we asked for a new JavaScript here, or in your editor, just create a new file, and then you could go ahead and paste the code that you've just copied, which is essentially the jQuery library. You could save this into your website, and you would now have a local version of this code. However, if you look at your assets directory, you'll see we have a scripts folder already, and if you expand that, you'll see inside of it is the version of jQuery that we've downloaded. So back on the website, if you went ahead and did the copy and paste, you'd want to go ahead and save this file as jQuery_1_6_1, or whatever the exact version number was that you downloaded, so that you always have a reference to the version of jQuery's library that you've used or are using in your website. So I'm going to close this without saving it, because as you can see, we've already provided the jQuery library for this workshop. Now that you've acquired the jQuery library, you'll need to attach it to the web pages that are going to invoke its methods. So if you look at the code of the file that you've opened, there's a break underneath your title tag where you can place the script block. Now you may hear or read various websites indicating where you should put your jQuery code, and some reference the head tag, but a bit later you'll see that code is going to be placed in the bottom of the page underneath, or rather above, the closing body tag. And one of the reasons for this is because by the time that script block is read, the entire DOM will have been loaded into the browser before anything can start executing. So for our purposes, for including the library, we're going to go ahead and place that underneath the closing title tag. And this is just a standard script block at this point. And then you add the source attribute, and you can go ahead and browse to the folder or type in the path to that folder inside of assets, where we've placed a scripts folder and we've placed the jQuery library for you. So we now have a reference to a local version of the jQuery library, and we can begin invoking methods of this library. Some developers, however, prefer to work off of a version on the external site, in other words, on the jQuery site. So if you return to your Chapter 3 Getting Started with jQuery directory, you'll find a file in there called exercise_1_1_A. So on line 6, we still have a script block in this file, and the source attribute is now pointing to googleapis.com, which is where the jQuery library is stored. So we're still grabbing a jQuery minified version. This one happens to be 1.4.2. But this is an alternative way of acquiring the library. So I still have complete access to the methods using this technique. So in this video, you learned how to acquire the jQuery library, either by downloading it and saving it locally within your website, or by referencing it directly from Google APIs. We also learned how to use the script tag to attach that JavaScript, no matter how we acquired it, to our web page so that we can begin using the library. In this video, we're going to learn the most fundamental method in the jQuery library, which is the jQuery function itself. This file contains a div tag on the right, and what we'll ultimately be doing with this exercise is hiding that summary or div tag and then showing it again. I've opened the file exercise_1_2.html from the Chapter 3 Getting Started with jQuery directory. So the first thing you'll need to do is attach the script that we've downloaded in previous exercises to this file. So this is the script tag pointing to the JavaScript, which is the jQuery library. Before we invoke the jQuery method, we need to make sure that the document object model is ready to accept some of these commands. So we use the ready function to do this. So I'll come back to this in just a moment. So for now, place the call to the jQuery method, which is done via the $sign. and we'll call the document ready function. So the real goal of this lesson is to understand the jQuery function itself. So to call the jQuery function, we use a $, inside of which we place parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we add what's known as a selector, or a jQuery selector. What we're trying to do now is query the document object model, or query our web page to locate a section or an element within that web page that we'd like to perform some action on. In this case, the element that we're looking for is the div tag whose ID is jQuery summary. And that's in order to go ahead and hide and show the summary. However, in order to do that, the user will have to click the buttons that we've provided right here, whose ID is show summary and hide summary. So the first thing we're going to acquire is these buttons, so that we can indicate that when those buttons are clicked, some action should take place. So here again, we're using the jQuery method to locate something on the web page and then provide some sort of action with whatever it is that we've located. So let's go back up to our call to the jQuery method, which again is the $, inside of which we're going to place in quotes that object on the web page that we're trying to locate. So we'll start with the button that hides the div tag, and its ID was hide summary. So we denote the ID property with the $, and then we type in the name of the div that we're looking for, or the ID of the div, I should say. Now that we've located what we want, we can perform some sort of action on it. In this case, we want to respond to the click of this button. So whatever it is we'd like to take place when that button is clicked, we do by writing a function. So inside the parentheses of the click, we're going to go ahead and call a function. We're actually going to write this function right here. And the first line of code in this function is another call to the jQuery method. So there's our $ parentheses for the jQuery method. Once again, we're going to pass in what it is we want to manipulate on the DOM or on the web page. And so once again, we quote it and we put our selector in here. So the name of that div tag that we want to show and hide is a div whose ID is jQuery summary. So back up in our call to the jQuery method, we'll pass in that div, jQuery summary, and we'll invoke another method of the jQuery object. So the jQuery object is the object whose methods we're invoking here. For example, the click method, and right now, to hide this div, the hide method. So using the $ creates a jQuery object whose methods we can invoke. And now we're invoking the hide method. We don't need to pass any arguments to this method. We're simply calling hide to hide what we've obtained with this jQuery, which is the div called jQuery summary. So our initial function is going to consist of another jQuery method call. This time the tag that we're trying to obtain in the XML file, instead of the hide summary, the button is called show summary. And once again, we're going to respond to the click by executing a function. And that function is going to call the jQuery method again dealing with jQuery summary, the div that we've been hiding and showing. And this time, instead of invoking the hide method, we're going to invoke the show method. Then we'll need to make sure we have all of our closing syntax for every opening curly brace and parenthesis that we've opened, that we've also closed it. And that would be 2 in this case. One for the call to the first click method and the second click method. Okay, so if we look at the code, you'll see that there's the call to the jQuery library up here on line 6, but the subsequent jQuery that we've written needs to be in its own script block as well. So make sure that you have surrounded the code that you've just written in a script block, just like that. At this point, you should be able to save and test this file in a browser, and it should provide you with the following response. You've got your show and hide summary buttons. The div shows by default, but if we go ahead and click the hide summary, it should go away, and if we click the show summary, it should come back. So in this exercise, we learned that in order to call the jQuery function, which returns a jQuery object. We use the $, and then we pass a selector to query or find the HTML elements within the web page that we're looking for in order to perform some action on them. In this exercise, the methods that we called following the jQuery object were the hide and show methods. In this video, we're going to learn how you begin to execute a jQuery. So with JavaScript, we typically wait for a page to load before we go ahead and execute our JavaScript statements. That's often done by responding to the onload method of the window object, and then we proceed to follow that with whatever functions we would like to execute. We have a similar situation with jQuery, but in this case we have to wait for the document object model to load. So what we need to do is the equivalent of waiting for the onload event. I've opened up exercise_1_3.html to begin this exercise. Using jQuery, the way that we do this is to invoke the ready function, passing to the jQuery method the document itself that's being loaded. So if you recall, first of all, we need a script block. So we'll go ahead and place a script block here. And then we call the jQuery function. And we pass the document object itself because it is here that we want to apply or invoke the ready function. So essentially, this is going to wait till the document object model's been loaded and we're ready to start executing some jQuery. So once again, we can invoke a function at this point because we've already invoked the ready function on the document itself. This particular web page has one hypertext link on it that you'll find right here. It's the link to jQuery.com and the ready function itself within the documentation. So what we'd like to do is acquire that hypertext link. So remember, we do that by passing to our jQuery function the element that we're looking for. So in this case, we're looking for an anchor tag. Now that we've queried the element that we'd like to locate on the web page, we perform some action on it. So what we're going to do is respond to the click by executing a function. We'll pass in the click event in this case. And we'll create an alert box. Our alert box is going to indicate that we've prevented the default behavior of the link, which is obviously to traverse the link and go to the website. So we're going to prevent that behavior. And we're going to let the user know that we've done that. And we've done it with a method called preventDefault. So there's our closing curly brace and our closing parenthesis and our terminator, which is the semicolon. So we've popped up the alert box, but we've never invoked the actual prevent default method. So at this point, if we click the link, we'll actually go to jQuery.com, but we're going to prevent that behavior by taking the click event object itself and invoking a method called preventDefault. Now we'll continue making sure that our closing brackets are all in place. I think the last one that we're missing would be right here. And that should take care of it. So before we can test this file, we still have to include our jQuery library. So make sure you've included a script block that references the jQuery library. At this point, you should be able to save the file, test it in the browser, and when you click the one link that's on the page, rather than traverse that link, which should take us to jQuery.com, our alert box pops up instead. In this video, you learned the equivalent of what we typically do in JavaScript, which is to wait for the loading of the document before we start executing our JavaScript. And in this case, what we do instead is we invoke the ready method of the jQuery object, which is a method that was performed on the document itself. In this video, we'll be practicing the selector portion of the call to the jQuery method. I've opened up exercise _4_1 in my editor. And you can also open this page in the web browser. You'll see that it consists of various elements, including some heading tags, some paragraph tags with a particular class applied, a table, some hypertext links, and an unordered list. So in order to practice the selectors, what we'll do is we will select these various elements within this web page, and we'll use a method that invokes CSS. And that CSS will simply highlight the element that we've queried with the jQuery method and place a yellow background behind it. So if you look at the script block, we've already made a call to the ready function on the document object. And below that, you'll see a series of comments. So each comment indicates the selector that we'd like to use, and then invoke the CSS to highlight whatever we've selected with yellow. So if you place your cursor underneath that first comment, the idea here is to set the selector for all paragraphs. So we begin by invoking our jQuery method with the $, and the selector that we need here is all paragraphs. Therefore, inside of the quotes, we simply add P for the P tag. That's what we're looking for. Next, we'll invoke the CSS method. It's going to allow us to select a CSS property and then set a value for that property. So it'll be the same one for each of these. It'll be the background color property, and we'll use a background color of yellow for this. You can save the file and test it in the browser, and you should see all instances of these P tags that you find throughout this document should now be highlighted with a background color of yellow, with the end result looking like this in the web browser. So you can see the tags that haven't been highlighted in yellow include the table tags, the TRs, the TDs, the THs, and the unordered list down here. Let's comment that bit of jQuery and move on to the next practice set, which is the selector for only the second paragraph. So here again, we invoke our jQuery method with the $. Now we need the selector for only the second paragraph. So we're still going to place the selector within quotes, and we're still looking for a P tag. However, we're going to use the syntax that allows us to get a particular child within the document. And we do this by passing that child's index number. And notice, for those who are comfortable with writing JavaScript, we don't use zero-based counting here. So typically in JavaScript, when we're grabbing an array, we'll get the second item by getting the array index number 1, because we start counting with 0 for the first instance and 1 for the second and 2 for the third and so forth. But jQuery will just use the number that you're looking for. So we're looking for the second paragraph tag here, so we pass in a value of 2. And then beyond that, we invoke the same CSS method with the same CSS property of background color and the same value of yellow. You should be able to save this now and test it in the browser. Be sure you've commented out that first bit of jQuery, though, so that you're not highlighting all paragraphs in yellow. The end result should look like this, where your paragraph that reads "this is paragraph 2" is now highlighted in yellow. We'll comment that bit of jQuery and move on to our next selector. This is the paragraph with a class of special. So if you scroll down a bit, you'll see that is the third paragraph, but we won't access it because it's the third paragraph, because that might change over time when we add an additional paragraph above it. So what we will do is access it by that class name, which is special. So underneath the comment, go ahead and call your jQuery method, quoting the selector, which again is the P tag. But like CSS, we're going to acquire the class with the dot. Had this been an ID selector, we'd acquire it with the pound symbol, and that class is called special. Now we can just copy the call to the CSS function and go ahead and paste it there, and you should be able to save and test this file as well, with the end result showing the paragraph whose class is special highlighted in yellow. Let's take a look at the next practice exercise. This is setting the selector for the second table row. So think about that and see if you can't figure out how we do that. It'll be very similar to the method used to grab the second paragraph tag. So we're going to use the same CSS syntax. We're just looking for a different tag now. So rather than look for the P tag, we're looking for the TR tag, but we're still looking for the second one. So your code should look like that. And you can save and test this file after you've placed that code in, but be sure to go back to the previous bit of jQuery and comment it out before your test. The finished result in the browser should look like this, with the even numbered paragraph, the second table row, and the table that says select all even paragraphs is currently highlighted in yellow. Let's comment that bit of jQuery. The next exercise, setting the selector for all hypertext links, should be fairly easy at this point for you. So let's move on to the one where we select the list item with the title attribute of most popular. So let's go back down and review that unordered list. Here's our unordered list with several LIs nested inside of it, but only one LI has a title attribute, and that title attribute is set to most popular. So let's take a look at how we would write this selector. First, we'll call our jQuery method. And again, we're going to highlight in yellow, so I'll just copy and paste that code right there. And of course, we're missing the selector portion, so let's figure out how we would do that. So we quote that, and we're looking for an element that has a title attribute of most popular. Now we are looking for an LI tag here, but it is the only tag with a title attribute. So we can put a filter within square brackets indicating that it is the title attribute that has to match most popular. And you notice I single quote here because I'm nesting these quotes within the double quotes that have to surround the jQuery selector. So if your code matches mine, you should be able to save and test this. And if you preview that in the browser, it is the third LI that should be highlighted in yellow, the one who has a title attribute that says most popular. We'll use that same method to set the selector for the hypertext link on the page that links to a PDF. So if you scroll down a bit, you'll see several hypertext links, many of which point to websites, including jQuery's jQuery at Wikipedia, W3 Schools jQuery page, and finally the last hypertext link, which links not to a web page but to a PDF file. So let's get our cursor underneath the comment and call our jQuery method. Still highlighting in yellow by calling the CSS method. And now let's put our attention on the selector portion. So as I mentioned, we're going to use the same technique as we did in the previous example, which was this square bracket filter that points to a particular attribute. In this case, the attribute is the href attribute. We're going to use another bit of syntax here, which is the $sign, but this is not to invoke the jQuery method. We're using this to indicate that the attribute href should end with the following characters. And here again, I'm going to use single quotes because I'm nesting. And in order to get that links to a PDF, the end of that hypertext reference attribute would be PDF. As you can see, the others all end with, well, this one doesn't end with anything because we don't have a path. We're going to the home page, but that would be HTML, as would this one. This one is linking to a .asp page, and here we're seeing that the href attribute ends with, denoted by our second $sign, .pdf. So your code should match the line that we've just typed, and you should be able to save and test now. The end result in the browser would show the last hypertext link, which is the link to the PDF. So this exercise was intended to give you a little bit of practice. We've really just scratched the surface. There's much more to learn about selectors, but this gives you the idea of how jQuery works. And of course, all of the selectors are easily found in any of the references that are linked to here, as well as the many jQuery books available.